Okay, well, recently I played about 5 hours of Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord Remaster on Xbox Series X. It's also on PlayStation, PC, and Switch. This is going to be kind of a somewhat off-the-cuff, laid-back reaction to those 5 hours playing the game, but also still digging into some of the finer details of the game that at least I care about. First off, just a description of the type of game this is. I would describe it as a grid-based, turn-based, party-based, just the dungeons, ma'am, dungeon crawl. There's no walking around town, talking to townspeople and trying to trigger quests. You go into the multi-layered dungeon, go as far as you can go without getting killed, and then you come back battered and bleeding, and you heal up at the end. You use the loot and the coin that you picked up to re-equip yourselves. Hopefully you've gained a level or two and can rest and level up and go back into the dungeon with new equipment, new skills. I really love a select breed of these types of games, specifically ones that don't really rely a lot on abstract puzzles. A lot of these types of games, they do seem to assume that players are going to want to, do a bunch of puzzles like moving levers and dials, and I just hate that stuff. So when Bard's Tale 4, the director's cut, allowed you to basically skip all of the abstract puzzles, then that game became this type of experience to me that I really, really love. But they are kind of few and far between when they don't have all that puzzle stuff, or when they don't have a whole lot of anime-style art. These style of games really started in the West, but their popularity really grew and took off in the East, and so you're going to see a lot more of these games coming out of like Asian countries, so maybe like Japan, and I'm not sure if China's making a lot of them, but anyway. So, in fact, the Wizardry license, I believe, the IP is owned by an Asian company of some kind, and so they took it and ran with it. So I'm really glad when these kinds of games do not have those aesthetics, do not have abstract puzzles, that return to the D&D aesthetic vibe that this game kind of grew out of when it was originally released on the Apple II in, I want to say, the mid to early 80s. And it was just a black screen with some white text and white grid bar type things, very, very simple. And actually, as you're playing this game, you have the option of having the original graphics overlaid very small in the bottom right corner, or if you want, you can even blow them up and stick them in the middle of your screen, and so you can get a constant interaction with the original aesthetic of the game if you want, which is nice. I think that it's really nice in kind of updating the game visually and aesthetically otherwise as well, but still trying to retain a lot of the mechanical core vibe of the original game. I have not played the original Apple II game, and so I couldn't, speak to the faithfulness to that game, but having played several games of this type and really enjoyed them, like Elminage Original, one of my favorite games of all time. I've enjoyed a good amount of Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk, Labyrinth of whatever, the Moon Society. Although the anime aesthetics I can only take for so long in those games, then I gotta move on to something else. And I've played the first hour or two of Wizardry Labyrinth of Lost Souls, which I'll come back to that in a little bit here, but love the visual aesthetics, in addition to, of course, appealing to the D&D art as it was the art kind of associated, the art style associated with D&D in the 80s and 90s, I guess. They seem to be kind of evoking that, quite a bit of that here, and I really appreciate that. So many people, so many game creators, well, at least I've heard in like reviewers, have said in the past, oh, it's boring when they use that aesthetic. Well, so many people seem to think that it's boring that it's actually not used near as much as you might think. So I love having it in this game. The animations are short and snappy, so unlike the extended sequences that I think turned people off ultimately to turn-based JRPGs, when you've got like Knights of the Round in Final Fantasy VII taking 10 minutes or whatever the crap it was, I think that overstayed its welcome and gave people the impression that turn-based combat is slow, but not if your animations are snappy. And these kinds of games tend to recognize that you keep the animations short and snappy so that the combat moves as quickly as your mind does. And it can move slow when you need to think a little bit more, and it can fly right past when you know exactly what you want to do. So I appreciate that. There's also a combat log, so even after you've selected all of the actions for your party members and you hit go and it all happens really fast, there's a combat log on the right side of the screen you can scroll up and down through. So if the storm of activity passes and you're like, crap, how did one of my party members die and someone else is at a third of their health? Well, you can go back through the combat log and kind of get an idea of, okay, what happened? Okay, I got to watch out for that in the future. So you really do have the best of both worlds in terms of like how fast it moves when you know what's going on, and how much you can really slow things down and think through things if you want. The aesthetics, though, as much as I enjoy them, I did get down to the second floor before my first 5 hours of the game were done, and the walls, the surroundings, they all look identical to the first floor. And with only, as far as I understand, 10 floors in this game, that's not a good sign. That already 2 out of the 10 are going to look identical. It would not surprise me if they all end up looking exactly the same. That would be a little bit of a disappointment, but it wouldn't surprise me. And I think it could be a minor issue in the long run, because at the end of the day, I come to these games for the gameplay. I think most people that come to these games do come to them for the gameplay, because they're not known as these lavish. This is not a genre that's known as being lavishly produced. Which, by the way, because it doesn't demand a lot, I am a little disappointed in the very frequent and sometimes long-lasting pop-in on the Series X. I can't speak to other platforms. I'm hoping that's just a thing that's going to get patched out. I'm playing it here on launch day, so I would want to be optimistic, but, I know better. Or, well, maybe I don't know better. I'm just a grumpy, dour, negative thinker. But anyway, it's a bummer that that's kind of a thing that's going on. But again, graphics are not what I come to these games for. So is it getting in the way of me enjoying what this game has to offer? I don't think so. I really enjoy the audio as well. The sound effects are all solid, fine. I have no complaints. In particular, I like the jingle of coins and the opening sound, the sound of an opening chest after combat when you get your loot. But maybe the most standout thing is the music. They've got, just with the first battle, I was like, oh my gosh, they are already kicking in the big epic fantasy choir. I would have expected that for a boss fight. Maybe it'll get old if this is the only music that plays on every level, every fight of the whole game, but it was still really cool. It's like, whoa, this has an epic vibe. So I was really digging on the auditory presentation as well. This game, in terms of what it is, how it plays, it's a classic. It birthed a genre, from what I understand. I don't think there was a game like this before it, but in some ways it does age poorly. Now, Digital Eclipse, the studio that made this remaster, added a slew of optional features that it defaults to, but you don't have to use if you don't want to. And all of those features are to improve quality of life. And they're great features. But at the end of the day, with all of those features activated, to make things less frustrating, less just kind of less of a slog in some ways, it still has incomplete at best auto mapping, which is not in all, but in many of these types of games, a standard quality of life feature these days. And what I mean by that is, in this genre of game, you're navigating through the dungeon. It's grid-based in that if you were to look at the map of the dungeon, it could be drawn faithfully and completely on graph paper. And you move one square at a time through that map. And in the olden days, from what I hear, people just had to use their own graph paper and, map the dungeons themselves. And I can understand how, at that time, that there would be a novelty to that. There's something, even today, that some might find to be tactically tactilely, I should say, satisfying to get out paper and pencil and get some of that old school vibe going on. But a number of other old school gamers have played this game, or games like it. I'll run into their comments on various forums and stuff saying, hey, I played the original back in the day, so this is not me wimping out. It's me being 40-something or 50-something, and I don't want to do that anymore. So I really appreciate the auto-mapping feature myself in games of this type. In this game, you have a mini-map in the bottom left corner that gives you an awareness. It fills in the fog of war for what's immediately around you and continues to do that as you go through a level of the dungeon, but all that you uncover, you can't see at once. It's all just limited to whatever you're currently close to and can be seen on that mini-map. And you can't open up a full map of what you have revealed so far and see the whole map of the dungeon level unless you cast a spell that you don't learn until at least second or third level. And then, you've only got so many copies of that spell that you can cast before heading back to town and resting. Now, what's nice is, after casting that spell once on a level, the game remembers what you've revealed, what squares you have been on, and you do actually have to be on every single one for it to fill in on the spell-created full map. Not the mini-map. That can just be the stuff you've seen that gets filled in, but the permanent one, permanent-ish, from this spell, you got to step on every single square. I learned that kind of the hard way, and it was a little frustrating to go back and fill in stuff I thought I'd already filled in. But anyway, so it keeps a record of what you have seen when you cast that spell, and so after casting the spell in a dungeon level, then there's a button prompt on the Xbox, it's the X button, that you can press anytime to bring up again a map of what was revealed the last time you cast that spell. Now, you may have covered some ground and filled some stuff in on your mini-map in the lower left corner. That's not going to be represented when you press this button to see the last kind of burned copy of the map that you'd revealed last time you cast the spell. So I've gotten into a bit of a rhythm of, as I leave a dungeon, I try to always leave one spell slot available for my bishop to cast that spell, so that right before I step out the dungeon, I can get an update of that map that I can then bring with me as I come back in to explore after resting in town. But it's still, it's far better, believe me, far better than not having anything at all. And it's actually not crazy far short of having a full-blown auto-mapping feature as I would like. Even so, I can imagine eventually just getting tired of the fact that I don't have a full auto-mapping feature when it has become so standard in a number of these types of games. So, and let's see, what else? Oh yeah, if you take a wrong turn early on like I did, this game will destroy you. And what do I mean by a wrong turn? Well, first off, if you just walk too far from the dungeon entrance, you can expect a full party wipe at some point. I learned early on that, what happened actually was I started going through the dungeon, and then you use the cross pad to kind of move forward, but in some games you press the A button, the activation button, to move forward, and in this game you do use that button to open up a door. So I was kind of getting used to the controls, and when I was looking at a wall once, I hit A. Well, what I didn't know was that there are a lot of hidden secret doors, even in just the first level of this dungeon. And if you press A next to one of them, then they will open up and reveal themselves. And of course, I saw that and I was like, well, okay. There was no tutorial telling me to even look for these yet, but there it is. That's a bit surprising. I guess I'll step through it. And so I stepped through it, went through the other side, which then sealed a wall behind me. So it was a one-way trip. I couldn't get back the way I came. And I get the feeling I'm not supposed to be aware of this other layer of the first floor of the dungeon yet, because the enemies were much more powerful. At least that's what it felt like. Maybe, I don't know, now that my guys are finally survived to level 4, if I went back it'd be a different story. Anyway, the fact that this layer exists, awesome, promising in terms of, longevity for gameplay, but stumbling into it before I was ready was very frustrating. And as I was just trying to figure out how far I should walk, maybe, You know, there are some useful tips during loading screens that maybe would tip me off to these kinds of things. Maybe that's how you're supposed to learn about this stuff. But the loading is thankfully fast enough that I miss most of those tips. And there's no internal tips catalog. I thought, okay, well, once I see these, maybe they've put them in a player info log somewhere. Couldn't find anything like that. So I might actually go back through some of my recorded footage just to find some of these tip screens and pause and read them. It also seems to lack the wide class and race variety common to its successors, unless those are going to be introduced later on. Again, I'm just in the first 5 hours, but right now they've got, if I remember correctly, fighter, thief, priest, bishop, mage, and samurai. And the races are human, dwarf, elf, halfling, and gnome. And that is all at this point. So maybe it'll open up later on. I don't have reason to think that it will. Minor disappointment. I'm pretty happy with the core classes, but it still feels like, oh, okay, so I don't see as much potential in that regard. All right, lost my train of thought. Had to break recording to go have ice cream with my family to celebrate the end of the school year. Anyway, I resolved to stop naming my party members because I experienced a party wipe not once, not twice, but 3 times, if memory serves. Or maybe it was the 3rd time I was like, this is not gonna work. And the 3rd time I was like, let's try. They give you the option of having a pre-generated party of level 2 characters when normally you start with level 1 characters. And so I started using that, but the randos they generated for me, I'm like, these classes are not synced up well with the races that were chosen for them. They felt randomly generated. I was like, no. So I stopped naming my party members and started to think of Dragon Warrior, my experience playing that on the NES. Of course, the Japanese title is Dragon Quest, a more direct translation, but those games early on were very much based on this type of game, where you would have to grind for XP for a while sometimes before you could move on. I remember stepping outside of the first town in Dragon Warrior, and for a little while just kind of walking around the town and fighting blue slimes until I was strong enough to venture just a little bit further out beyond that. And so there was, after a couple of party wipes, the realization that, okay, I need to maybe take the Dragon Warrior approach here. And now my no-name heroes have lasted up to, most of them, level 4 at this point, and may soon be worthy of names, better than Meat 1 and 2 or Mage 1. It is too soon to say, I think. But I'm accepting the sort of pacing grind where I'm just kind of pacing back and forth between two, the ends of a hallway near the entrance to the dungeon. I've gone well past that pacing at this point, but that's what I started out at. And I really, very soon after realizing that's just how I needed to start things, began to feel the growth of my party's power through XP, through purchasing power, because of the coins I would pick up. And 5 hours in, I'm definitely enjoying myself. But I do have doubts that what is this? It's got a mouthful of a name. Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord Remaster. I have doubts that it's going to hold my interest long term. Just because there's, like I said, there's not a lot of depth compared to some other titles in this kind of genre, and the graphical similarity, the visual similarity from one floor to the next. We'll see if that bears out all the way through. But anyway, but yeah, I'm enjoying myself. I just wonder about the tail end of this experience. Now, there's almost no story, which I prefer. But that does mean that there's almost no potential for moral or philosophical springboards to think about, to talk about, to reflect on. Some things may emerge as I reflect on the game deeper in, maybe especially regarding the gameplay. I think there's some things actually mechanically about this genre that have given me good things to reflect on, and I talk about that in a video I made called Elmanage Original and Dungeon Crawl Theology, and you can find that on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel, Elmanage Original and Dungeon Crawl Theology. But nothing in particular with this game philosophically is coming to mind, although if you've ever had concerns about playing games in worlds with fantasy magic and dark deeds, then you might be interested in a couple videos I've put out, one titled Can Christians Be Evil in Games? And the other is Fictional Magic Sinful to Enjoy? And both of those can be found on the YouTube channel as well. To sum up, my glass half full look at this game would label it as a lavishly, generously produced museum piece of the original game, with some enjoyable gameplay for sure, and more money put into visual and audio aesthetics than most any other game in this genre. So in that sense, it's a generous gift. This did not have to be this kind of a remaster. I mean, it's really a remake, and a very generous one. That's the glass half full view of this from where I'm sitting. Half empty, I'm thinking that I'm not seeing yet the same level of richness in gameplay as, say, Elmanage Original or the more recent Labyrinth of Refrain and Labyrinth of Galeria. And what I played are the first few hours of Wizardry Labyrinth of Lost Souls as well, which is, before this one, I think the most recent entry in this series, the Wizardry series in particular. That game is not as graphically advanced, it's not as aesthetically rich as what I'm seeing in this remaster. But, I mean, aesthetically, this wins hands down for me against the Labyrinth games. But the trade-off in aesthetic improvements over, say, Elmanage Original and Wizardry Labyrinth of Lost Souls, that trade-off is not worth the loss of depth, mechanically, that those games offer. At $40, I'm not sure I feel like I got the kind of deal I usually shoot for in enjoyment and playtime. I suspect this would feel better to me as a $30 game, and potentially like a steal for $20. But those are all of my thoughts for now on Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord Remaster. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.